Imagine two men standing in the same dangerous situation. Both feel their heart rate rise. Both experience the same surge of adrenaline. Both are afraid. Yet one is called brave, and the other is quietly judged as less so, not because of what they feel, but because of how they behave. Now here is the uncomfortable question that pulls us in today. Why do many people, across media, conversation, and even casual judgment, tend to assume that a Chinese man is braver than a man from the United States? As a psychiatrist, I can tell you this assumption does not come from biology. It does not come from genetics, and it does not come from intelligence or physical strength. It comes from something far more subtle and far more powerful, the human mind's habit of confusing emotional expression with emotional capacity. We are wired to read courage on the surface. We watch posture, tone of voice, facial expression, and silence. When a man endures hardship without complaint, when he lowers his eyes and continues forward without protest, we interpret that restraint as strength. When another man speaks openly about fear, stress, or emotional struggle, we interpret that honesty as fragility. And in that moment, bravery is misdiagnosed. In my clinical practice, fear is universal. The difference is not who feels it, but who is allowed to show it. In many East Asian cultures, emotional endurance is trained early. Children learn, often without words, that self-control is a form of respect, that tolerating discomfort preserves harmony, and that silence can be a moral act. Over time, this creates adults who appear unshaken in circumstances that would visibly disturb others. Observers see this calm exterior and label it courage. In contrast, American culture has long encouraged articulation. Naming fear is seen as healthy. Speaking about stress is considered self-awareness. Asking for help is framed as emotional intelligence. But to an outside observer, this openness can look like weakness, not because it is, but because it violates an expectation that bravery must be quiet. Psychologically speaking, silence is not the absence of fear. It is a learned response to fear. And here is where perception becomes distortion. When a man stands firm because he believes retreat would dishonor his family, his community, or his history, we call him brave. When another man steps back to protect his mental health or personal well-being, we call him cautious. Yet both are acting from deeply internalized values. Both are managing fear. Both are making difficult decisions. What we are witnessing is not a difference in courage, but a difference in what courage is allowed to look like. Human beings tend to romanticize endurance, especially when it comes without complaint. But psychiatry teaches us that endurance can be a survival adaptation shaped by generations of instability, scarcity, or collective responsibility. Calm in the face of danger may reflect resilience, but it may also reflect habituation to stress. The nervous system does not care about nationality. It reacts to threat the same way everywhere. What changes is the social permission to express that reaction. So when we say one man is braver than another, what we are often revealing is not a truth about him, but a bias about ourselves. We are measuring courage using a cultural ruler, then acting surprised when the results differ. True bravery is not silence. True bravery is not expression. True bravery is acting in alignment with deeply held values while fear is present, and fear is always present. The real psychological question, then, is not why one man appears braver than another, but why we continue to confuse unfamiliar emotional languages with strength and familiar ones with weakness. And once you begin to see that distinction, the illusion of national bravery quietly falls apart. From the moment a child begins to understand the world, fear is not only felt, it is taught. Long before anyone explains what courage means, cultures silently instruct their members on how fear should be handled, displayed, or concealed. In many Chinese households, endurance is woven into daily life as a virtue rather than a choice. Discomfort is something to be tolerated, not negotiated. Emotional restraint is often associated with maturity, discipline, and respect for others. When fear arises, the expected response is control of expression, posture, and reaction. Over time, this conditioning produces adults who may experience intense internal stress yet appear outwardly composed, even under pressure. That composure is frequently mistaken for fearlessness. In contrast, American culture tends to socialize individuals to acknowledge fear openly. Children are encouraged to talk about emotions, to name anxiety, and to seek reassurance. Fear is not viewed as a failure but as information, something to be discussed, processed, and resolved. While this approach promotes emotional awareness and psychological health, it also means fear is more visible. When two individuals face the same hardship, the one who verbalizes distress may appear less brave than the one who remains silent, even though both are experiencing the same emotional intensity. Psychologically, neither response indicates greater courage. They reflect different lessons about what fear is allowed to look like. What we interpret as bravery is often simply the product of long-term cultural training. The way a person perceives risk is deeply influenced by whether they are raised in a collectivist or individualist society. In collectivist cultures, personal decisions are rarely experienced as personal alone. Every action is connected to family, community, and shared identity. From a psychological perspective, this creates an internalized sense of responsibility that extends far beyond the self. When a man in such a culture faces danger, hardship, or uncertainty, withdrawing is not merely a personal choice, it can feel like a moral failure. Endurance becomes intertwined with loyalty, and risk is reframed as duty. This often results in individuals accepting situations that appear extraordinarily brave to outsiders, not because fear is absent, but because the cost of stepping back feels psychologically unbearable. In contrast, individualist cultures teach people to evaluate risk through a personal lens. Safety, autonomy, and mental well-being are prioritized, and choosing not to endure unnecessary suffering is often framed as rational self-care. Risk-taking is voluntary rather than obligatory. From the outside, this can be misread as hesitation or lack of courage, when in reality it reflects a different value system, one that legitimizes self-preservation. Psychologically, both approaches involve courage, but the courage serves different masters. One protects collective honor and continuity, the other protects personal integrity and long-term well-being. When a society experiences prolonged hardship over generations, the human nervous system adapts in ways that are both remarkable and invisible. Historical trauma, whether through war, famine, political instability, or economic uncertainty, does not simply disappear when conditions improve. Instead, it reshapes expectations about life itself. In populations that have repeatedly faced instability, stress becomes normalized. Children grow up observing adults who continue functioning despite uncertainty, loss, or fear, and this behavior is unconsciously absorbed as the standard response to difficulty. Psychologically, this creates what can be described as adaptive courage, a learned capacity to remain composed in situations that would overwhelm someone raised in relative stability. This adaptation does not mean fear is reduced. It means fear becomes familiar. When the mind expects hardship, it prepares for it. Emotional reactions are often muted not because they are absent, but because reacting strongly offers no advantage. From an external perspective, this calm endurance can appear heroic or unusually brave. However, psychiatry recognizes that such resilience often carries an unseen cost: emotional suppression, delayed processing of trauma, or chronic stress responses. What looks like exceptional courage may actually be a survival mechanism refined over time. Understanding this distinction allows us to respect resilience without romanticizing the pain that produced it. In clinical psychology, emotional suppression is often misunderstood as emotional absence. In reality, suppression is a strategy, not a void. Many individuals are raised in environments where expressing distress is discouraged, not because emotions are unimportant, but because control is equated with strength. Over time, people learn to experience fear, sadness, or anxiety internally while presenting a calm exterior to the world. This outward composure is frequently interpreted as bravery, especially in high-pressure situations, because observers associate visible steadiness with emotional mastery. Yet internally, the emotional intensity may be just as strong as in someone who openly expresses distress. On the other hand, emotional expression, verbalizing fear, naming stress, or seeking reassurance, is often a sign of psychological awareness and healthy emotional processing. However, because this openness makes fear visible, it is commonly misinterpreted as weakness. The observer sees the emotion, not the regulation behind it. From a psychiatric standpoint, neither suppression nor expression is inherently superior. Both are coping mechanisms shaped by social learning. The misinterpretation occurs when we confuse style with strength. Silence does not guarantee courage, and expression does not negate it. Bravery exists in how fear is managed, not in how loudly or quietly it is displayed. The human mind is deeply uncomfortable with complexity, so it constantly searches for shortcuts. One of the most powerful shortcuts is stereotyping, the tendency to assign meaning to individuals based on limited information and cultural narratives. When observers encounter behavior that aligns with their expectations, the brain rewards itself with a sense of certainty. If a man appears quiet, enduring, and emotionally restrained, he is quickly categorized as strong or brave. If another appears expressive, questioning, or cautious, he may be categorized as fragile. These judgments often occur automatically, without conscious reflection, and feel like objective truth rather than subjective interpretation. From a psychological standpoint, this is observer bias at work. We project our own values, fears, and definitions of courage onto others, then mistake those projections for reality. Media portrayals, historical narratives, and selective storytelling reinforce these biases, creating simplified images of entire cultures. Over time, these images harden into stereotypes that feel self-evident. Psychiatry teaches us to slow this process down, to question first impressions, and to examine context before drawing conclusions. When we do, we often discover that what we labeled as bravery was familiarity, and what we labeled as weakness was simply a different emotional language. When we strip away stereotypes, cultural myths, and surface-level judgments, one conclusion becomes unavoidable: bravery does not belong to any nation, and fear does not discriminate by culture. What differs is not the human nervous system, but the rules societies impose on how fear may be shown. We have learned to admire silence without asking what it costs, and to doubt expression without understanding the strength it requires. In doing so, we confuse endurance with courage and visibility with weakness. Psychology teaches us that courage is not the absence of fear, nor the performance of toughness. It is the ability to act meaningfully while fear is present. Sometimes that action looks like quiet endurance. Sometimes it looks like speaking up, stepping back, or asking for help. Both require strength. Both demand self-regulation. Both are human. The danger lies not in misunderstanding courage, but in ranking it. When we decide that one style of bravery is superior to another, we reduce complex individuals into symbols and deny them their full humanity. True psychological maturity begins when we stop asking who is braver and start asking why we needed that comparison in the first place. Only then do we move closer to understanding courage as a universal human struggle, not a cultural trophy.